Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Hello, I'm Sal Berman, the University of Michigan's Chief Information Security Officer, and welcome to Summit 20, Summit Reimagined. As hopefully you all know, Summit is the capstone event of U of M's celebration of Cybersecurity Month. Normally, we'd be meeting in historic Rackham Auditorium for a full day of presentations and conversations exploring the latest in IT security and privacy. Like much of 2020, this year is a bit different. We're a lot different. So rather than asking you to be glued to your screen for hours on end, we want you to stay engaged for the next hour as the University of Michigan's VP for IT and CIO explores the future of cybersecurity with today's special guests. Your participation is hugely welcome. There's a link to a Google Doc on the events page to submit questions, which we'll get to a bit later. So please go to that Google form that's right under your live stream, and you can add in questions there. And now I want to turn it over to Dr. Ravi Pendse, U of M VP for IT and CIO, my cybersecurity and privacy partner, and by the way, a pretty darn good nature photographer. So Ravi, why don't you take it away?
Thank you, Saul, for those kind words and the kind introduction. Appreciate it. And good afternoon and welcome to Summit 2020 Fireside Chat. My name is Ravi Pendse, as Saul indicated. I have the privilege and honor to serve as the Vice President for Information Technology and Chief Information Officer at this amazing institution, which means I actually work for all of you. We have an exciting discussion coming up where we will talk about the future of cybersecurity and what should we all be doing to keep us safe and our organization safe. This conversation is so relevant as it comes in the middle of an imminent threat advisory for ransomware, for example, issued by Homeland Security against healthcare providers. I'm sure not a day goes by when we don't hear or read about some type of hacking attempt or some kind of intrusion occurring across the country and the world. I'm sure you have watched and heard concerns being expressed about our election infrastructure. One of the candidates' website was recently hacked, as you probably read. And if that's not all enough, we are in the middle of a pandemic with a lot at stake for our country in these coming elections. The good news on the cybersecurity front is that we have two incredibly distinguished intellectuals here to help us have a thoughtful conversation in our panel discussion. Please allow me to introduce them. While both of them don't need much of an introduction, they're very well known, but I just wanted to share a few facts about them. Dr. Gee Rittenhouse is the Senior Vice President and General Manager of Cisco's Security Business Group. He's responsible for a company's global security business, including strategy, portfolio, and architecture. Previously, he also served as the president of Bell Labs. As a technology thought leader, he has published numerous articles and holds more than a dozen patents. Gee has a PhD degree in electrical engineering and computer science from MIT. And on a personal level, he has been a wonderful friend and a mentor to me. Gee also loves to play drums and jazz piano. He loves basketball, but during the pandemic, because he respects and follows social distancing rules, he has taken up cycling. Gee, you may be aware of this, but among Michigan IT community, we have some incredibly talented musicians. So maybe next time you're here in person, we can all get together and have a wonderful jam session among all of our colleagues.
Sorry about that.
We appreciate you being here. Doug Song, our other panelist, needs actually no introduction, especially on our campus and in state of Michigan. He's the co-founder and general manager of Duo Security at Cisco, one of the fastest growing cybersecurity businesses in the world. Doug also serves as VP and GM of Cisco's Zero Trust, the most comprehensive approach to securing access across IT applications and environments from any user, device, and location. And as you all know, Doug is one of our own. He has gotten a BS degree in computer science from University of Michigan. Last year, Doug and his wife, Lynn, founded the Song Foundation, which invests in innovative people who are improving the quality of life for all in Southeast Michigan and helping to build a more just and equitable world. Among its contribution, the Song Foundation committed $1 million in emergency relief fund for small businesses in Washtenaw County amid the pandemic. Thank you, Doug and Lynn, for your generosity. And for those of you who know Doug well, I'm sure you're aware that Doug continues to be an avid skateboarder. He actually started the Ann Arbor Skate Park. Maybe one of these days, Doug will convince me to take lessons in skateboarding, or maybe he'll teach me because I am not a skateboarder. That would be a tough thing. But Doug, I'm looking forward to you teaching me how to skateboard one of these days.
Sure.
So thank you both for being here. And are you ready to get started?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I know both of you live cybersecurity each day. I'm curious, what did you think you wanted to do or be before getting into cybersecurity? So I'll have Gee go first, and then we'll follow with Doug.
Well, I grew up in a household where my grandfather was a carpenter. So I always enjoyed working with my hands and building things. So in the early days, I wanted to be a carpenter as well. And then as I grew, I wanted to be an architect. But then one day I found a computer and never really went back to hammers and saws. So, but in those early days, I wanted to be an architect.
Well, that's so interesting how all of us are shaped by what happens as we are growing up and what we see around us. Doug, what's your story? How did you get into cybersecurity?
Well, that's a long, how I got into cybersecurity is a bit of a longer story, but before cybersecurity, I liked art and I liked design, and actually those things end up becoming useful later, right? In the course of building a company and thinking about how to deliver a user-facing security technology. But actually, when I came to Michigan, I thought I was going to major in philosophy. That didn't really happen, but.
That's fascinating. And, in philosophy, actually, one of the courses that's often taught is a logic course. And that's tied very closely to computing and computer science and cybersecurity, actually.
Absolutely. And actually, these days, I do find that at least some of the philosophy courses I did take at Michigan on ethics and so forth have had some bearing in how we think about security as a discipline. Security, in many ways, is about configuring who has access to what, which can be a political kind of thing. But yeah, technology, as we've seen, it can be particularly in security, double-sided, and so it's not a bad grounding to have, right? Particularly at the world's most ethical company, right? But Cisco is often ranked as one of the top 10 most ethical companies.
And it's a credit to both of you and all of the leadership at Cisco. And I've seen these type of recognitions come Cisco's way literally every year. So kudos to all of you and for your hard work and dedication to maintaining highest level of ethics. So appreciate your leadership on that. One of the other questions I wanted us to kind of think about and have a discussion is, obviously encryption is an important attribute that we all use. We talk a lot about end-to-end encryption. We of course use multi-factor authentication through DUO. And it's very important to keep our campus and our community safe. But we also realize that there are no security silver bullets. Nonetheless, I'm curious to know from your vantage point, from your experiences, from the types of things you're working on and seeing, what do you think is the next must-have security tool or technology?
Doug, do you want to go first, or?
Yeah, sure. I guess I think it's less maybe about specific tooling these days than it's sort of about the outcomes, right? Because we've built so much technology, whether in security or IT more generally, that the biggest problem we see is the cost from the complexity, right, of managing all that safely and reducing the operational overhead, right, of security and IT. And so that's actually become very clearly one of our core missions at Cisco Security, to really figure out how to reduce and simplify and actually make these specific disciplines of security work better together. And I'll hand off to Gee there to talk more about what we're doing, but I do think that's something that I think we all feel as security practitioners. It's there's just too much. And it's almost for every IT product, there's a security product you're supposed to put in front of it. And at the end of the day, humans, mere mortals, have to manage this stuff. And so that's something we've taken on as a mission to go and solve for.
No, I really appreciate that focus on simplification and also being cost conscious. Because in my role as the Vice President and CIO, oftentimes while we want to provide the very best security possible for our community, cost is a driver and complexity is a driver. We have to think about that. To your point, that is this a user-centric design? And I know that was one of the successes behind Duo, your company that is so incredibly innovative that you founded. Gee, more to add to that question? In terms of,
yeah, I would say it has been known for a long time, and I do think it's a truth in security that we as humans are actually the weak link in all of this. We are, like, to Doug and your earlier point, encryption means nothing if actually my keys are stolen and someone else can decrypt. But the same is true also on the security response. And I often think about how many times when something is going on in a network or in an environment, the systems respond. The alarms come, the warnings are there, but there's so many, it's overwhelming. And in a prescriptive way, as humans, we can't really deal with that level of input and try to sift through the noise quickly. We quickly get overwhelmed. And so I do think that just like we see humans as the weak link in the attack vectors that are coming in, and multi-factor authentication and continuous access controls and all of these technologies to help us there, we do see automation, artificial intelligence, machine learning on the other side to really be able to help we as practitioners be able to prioritize, automatically deal with things. And there's certainly a cost consequence, as you point out, lowering the cost. But I think that kind of time to detect, time to remediate is one of the key factors that, from a technology perspective, just like MFA on the user side, we can kind of apply to help push this forward.
And I appreciate that. Go ahead, Doug.
I'd be curious also, Ravi, how you might think about the role of security with respect to new IT that gets developed, because one thing we also see as a big area of concern and growing focus, right, for many organizations is the fact that almost every enterprise is an application or a set of applications these days and has many to develop themselves, but actually making sure that what gets developed is actually safe from the start. Because again, an ounce of prevention worth a pound of cure later. But again, it's a very human problem, right? Of how do you shape from a DevOps or application security perspective the kind of practices that enable again, mere mortals to be able to write safe code and deliver applications that aren't themselves risks.
No, it's a great point. And at this amazing institution, we have incredible developers everywhere creating new ideas and developing code. And I know Saul's organization does a terrific job, our security organization here at Michigan, in supporting our researchers, helping them review their code and providing them timely feedback. So we are designing with security in mind, and security is not an afterthought. It's so critical to embed that thinking along the development cycle. So point well taken. Saul tells me that we have several questions in the queue. So if it's okay with you, I'm going to go to Saul to get a couple of questions from the audience, and then we'll continue our conversation again. Saul, over to you.
Right. So we do have a growing number of questions. I'm not going to necessarily take them in order, but we will try to get to as many as we can today. So here's a question that sort of blends the world of security and privacy, which is also a passion of Ravi and mine. So when trying to predict the future, many institutions gather significant sensitive data on people. How do we balance gathering this information for improving information, or gathering this data for improving information security, but also respect privacy along the way?
Yeah. Oh, well, listen, I think I've seen the university always tend to do well because as a research institution, I think universities always understood that, security might be about technology, controls, and policy, but privacy is often really about consent. And so, with the IRB and all the things that, the kind of controls that universities had to make sure that there's sort of the consentful sort of use of technology and application of data or collection of it. I think, that's one of those areas where institutionally as an organization, I'm sure the university probably has a little more concern for that and care for it maybe than your average, right, organization out there. But yeah, I think it's increasingly one of those things where it's a matter of policies and regulations that exist even outside of an individual organization. And we see that that's one of the biggest things we see reshaping the industry at large, of the number of legal frameworks, right, that really are governing more industries. I can't name an industry that doesn't have some amount of regulated data at this point. And what's going to be very interesting to see is, over time, as the geopolitics of data and information all sort of shake out with the rest of what's going on in the world, how much of that ends up being more geographically determined and restricted, and those things can become very complex. And so yeah, more and more we see that, if you're engineering systems, you might actually have to have lawyers to help you. And that's, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is different level of work for sure.
Yeah, Doug, in case you're
I'll
not
take a
aware,
somewhat
Saul,
more
by the way, has a
nuanced.
JD degree as well. Since you mentioned lawyers, so I keep them very close. Gee, go ahead.
I'll take a more nuanced view of the topic because I think in the past, security and privacy could be viewed as two distinct things. And I think Doug summarized it well, one around consent and one around kind of more observation. But projecting out into the future, I actually see this being much more nuanced than this traditional view because of the fact that we're adding in behavioral analytics into the equation. And so it's not enough just to, for me, to say we have G, he has a username and a password, he has multi-factor authentication. But if all of a sudden G is logging in from a location that is atypical, or G is doing something that is atypical, I may increase G's risk score because G may be compromised in some way, or G may be an inside threat to the organization and whatnot. And the more of that kind of information you collect, you do start to blur these lines around privacy. And we do have to have rules. And by the way, this is known. And so there are standards around how long you collect this information. Where is this information stored? Is it anonymized in some way? And on and on and on it goes. But I do think as the threats and the access becomes more complex going forward, these lines won't be as black and white as they perhaps were in the past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that is where I do think maybe philosophy is useful in providing some sort of ethical grounding framework.
Lawyers,
as lawyers, but we definitely see that even in certain industries like in banking, it's been a long time since we've had just kind of proof of a bearer token as sort of authentication in banking. It's the bank's business model is built around KYC or know your customer, and so it's almost more like identification, right, than authentication, because you haven't trusted them and you've given consent, right, for them to do a lot more with your information. But again, the point at which facial recognition technologies and things like this end up becoming more widespread, we do need, I think, more of a set of controls that provide a level playing field so that we can all be assured that information about us will be used ethically.
And I appreciate that. That's very thoughtful. Saul, you want to take one more from the audience?
Sure. So at the University of Michigan, we care passionately about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And IT in general and information security in particular are often less than the diverse population we want, whether that's people of color, whether that's women. So what can we do better at the university? What are you doing in Cisco to ensure that we get as diverse a population in the IT security space? Because we also know that that breeds ideas that can lead to better solutions.
And if I may jump in and add that while the question is about IT security, that is a challenge actually in many technology areas. And so love to hear your thoughts. So.
Yeah, so first of all, we take that topic very, very seriously, and in all full spectrum diversity. I think one of the things that happens where universities can be helpful is that there is this kind of social funneling. So we have STEM, and we start off very young, and then they continue to go forward, and the university captures that very well. But there's also kind of non-traditional paths to IT, and in particular security. So with security, we have many, many examples of people coming out of non-computer science and just inquisitive on how systems work or what's going on, because it's that kind of insight that also exposes how systems can be exploited or weaknesses. And so I think being able to provide opportunities even kind of later in the educational, their career, to be able to change. Like something happened, you were a philosophy major, and then you realize, hey, wait a second, I can apply this somewhere else, allowing those transitions, because it may not be a traditional path, particularly in the security space.
Doug, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that, particularly at Duo, Duo, we're very proud to build a team that I know the average in cybersecurity is, unfortunately only about 11% women. Duo, ahead of Cisco's acquisition was, acquisition by Cisco was about 40% women and underrepresented minority. And I think, in large part is due to our mission, right? We were looking to democratize security, make the kind of security that every organization could be capable of achieving. Especially at a time where the attack surface, the target of those attacks were people, right? And so, we had to make sure that we were thoughtful around building a team that could solve these kinds of security problems from a wide variety of perspectives. And so actually it was from the University of Michigan that we actually hired our DEI leader, Trey Boynton, used to actually do a lot of that work for the University of Michigan residence halls. And I actually benefited, I think, from either her training or someone else's when I was a RA back, maybe not Trey's, but someone else's previously. And so we took a lot of that platform from the university actually into Duo, right? Thinking about how we reduce barriers to brilliance, thinking about how we create those equal access opportunities to learn, to grow, develop, and ultimately to succeed. And really building that culture intentionally and starting really from the top, where again, university was a wonderful training ground for me as a leader, seeing how seriously that's done here. But in the industry, it is a challenge because as Gee points out, we have to take a wider view of what available talent looks like. We also have to make sure we take an intentional tack to developing it and making sure that we create multiple pathways to success for folks into an industry that, again, because it has not had a lot of, it's a new industry, right? And so it's not been diverse from the start. It takes a lot of effort, right, to overcome some of the inertia that's been there previously. And so, it's one of those things where Chuck, our CEO, talks about powering inclusive future for all, right? As a technology business, we believe that's an opportunity and an obligation that we all have to really create an environment where, again, we can be successful. And we think of that ultimately leading to the success of our strategy. If we're successful doing that, then we'll have more opportunity in the market with many more folks and organizations that we can serve by having built the kind of organization that understands how to do that. So yeah, for us, DEI, the diversity equity work we do is truly strategic and a core part of our mission.
No, we appreciate that. And we appreciate also, you mentioned Chuck, his leadership and how he organized his very first cabinet when he had appointed it the message around diversity was very clear. Yeah. So he walked the walk. And I know, Doug, you have done amazing things with, of course, things you have picked up at Michigan. And we are proud of what you've accomplished as well as our wonderful graduate. So continuing our conversation, we'll come back to some audience questions in a minute. But I know we already talked about security, privacy. Doug, I know how innovative Duo Security has been, your company. The innovation occurs in Cisco as well. So I'm curious to know, can you talk about how innovation occurs in your teams, in your organizations, and how you encourage risk-taking while also balancing security and privacy?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, we think that, particularly for insecurity, right? Yeah, as you like to say, where the attackers are many, varied, and constantly improving. It's not just enough to get ahead, but you have to stay ahead, right? And so there's that's the difference in security. There's an active adversary that you're always trying to stay ahead of, and so innovation is key. If you're not innovating in security, you're losing. So a large part of how we've had to think about this is creating the kind of culture that admits learning. Well, not just admits learning; it's built to accelerate learning. And so actually, we took some of those cues also from the university, thinking about, well, what does a learning organization look like? What does it feel like? And what does it signal, right, to the kind of people who would join us? And so we only have 3 core values at Duo, which is to engineer the business. We say we try lots of things. We're very experimental. And we know a lot of them are not going to work. But the second value we have is to learn together, that we either win or we learn. And, it's part of building an anti-fragile culture where, every issue we come across actually, makes us better. And, a good example of a organization that's kind of built like that is the NTSB, the National Transportation Security Board, your safety board. No planes in the US anyway ever crash the same way twice, because when one does, they go and study it, they figure it out and make sure that the next one doesn't. And other teams I've been part of, like OpenBSD as a secure operating system, was very similar. There's a known instance of a new failure mode, like format strings attacks or something. We go and clear out the entire source tree of it and make sure that would never happen again. So anyway, but building a process in which you can learn together through, whether QBRs or retrospectives or what have you. But again, a commitment as a team. It's not about who's right, but what's right, and that everyone will get better together was a big part of it. But then the third one was actually around being kinder than necessary and going out of our way to help each other be successful. And that's something that I think, we could all benefit from a little bit of right now at this time, this political moment. But understanding that it's not about me, it's always about we, and that as a team, we would need to continue to suspend our collective disbelief and like, I don't know if that idea is right, but you know what? We'll be 60% in agreement, 100% in commitment, right, to drive that forward. And win or learn, right, we'll see what happens. And so those are the kind of formulas in terms of our culture that kind of set up for how we'd allow innovation to happen. Because most organizations actually are innovative. It's just whether or not they actually surface it, right, or are able to rise very far. Because everyone has great ideas. Everyone sees problems and they try to do something about them. But in some organizations, it's harder to actually make the change than others. And so we try to remove all those barriers.
No, very well said, Doug. And I agree with you. In the current world, we need so much of we versus me with the current political situation, what we hear. And I also agree with you that, and this is tied to our views on diversity and inclusion, where I oftentimes, we talk about it here at Michigan, that perhaps the ideas that we haven't heard so far are yet to be spoken. How do we ensure that everybody has a voice at the table? Gee, your thoughts on innovation, how innovation occurs in your large organization, your teams, while respecting privacy, risk-taking, and so on?
Yeah, I think just building on what Doug said, but just perhaps at a different scale, the security industry is unique in that we do face active adversaries. So typically you innovate relative to an ecosystem of competitors, all trying to satisfy a customer value proposition. We have this third party in there that's actually trying to break things and we fix. And so there's there's this iterative process of like a cat and mouse kind of chase. And so a classic example or modern one would be as enterprises move to the cloud and they want to accelerate their business, and there's a digital transformation that happens. There's an industry push that's generally led through a technology lens and a business objective. And then people find holes in that from a security perspective, and security folks like us come in and try to patch those holes. So innovation is typically about around the approach and the dynamic, not necessarily the problem statement. The problem statement is very clear. Someone is taking advantage of a vulnerability or an issue, and we help to solve it. And so the innovation process is slightly different in that it's constrained, but it's very, very broad and multidisciplined, to your earlier point about diversity, and also in a way that has to be done quickly, because you are constantly responding to these threats. And so trying to get out in front of it is also part of the innovation process.
No, very well said. We appreciate that. Saul, I know we have many more questions, so let's go to you again, and let's take a couple of questions from the audience as well.
Sure. So I see our adversaries almost as competitors.
Yeah.
And in this case, our adversaries, way back in the day, they were script kiddies and people, hacking from the basement. These days, they're organized cyber criminals and cyber crime rings. They're state sponsored. What is the best way, in your estimation, that we can try to stay ahead of those competitors or those adversaries?
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple things to keep in mind. Everything you said, Saul, is absolutely true, but I think those kind of attacks, while super sophisticated and super well funded, are still in the kind of traditional mode, and we'll just continue to increase the capabilities of those that defend those networks and assets. But I think increasingly what we find is the complexity of the systems is so overwhelming that actually people are just missing the basics, like not being able to configure a database properly or a cloud instance properly, or forgetting that their credentials are all over the place. These systems are incredible. And just because of that complexity, there are big doors that are left open, that when the systems were kind of well-known, prescriptive, kind of isolated code, they were clean. It was easier to observe those holes. Now it's much harder. And so I still think that one of the big issues that will face us for a while, in addition to the ones that you are enumerated, are around just the complexity of the systems and that complexity opening up vulnerabilities that people surprisingly easily can take advantage of.
Doug, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, just building on that with Gee, I think what it means ultimately is that many organizations will have to think not just about what it takes to enable these users, but how you engineer these processes for safety and design processes really for resilience, right? That and again, I know that organizations like U of M have quite a bit of maturity there, and in terms of doing tabletop exercises, thinking through all manner of scenarios and things like this, but reducing again the operational burden to achieve those outcomes and achieve hygiene, to achieve sort of degree of resilience, so that again, it's really awful to see right now what's happening with ransomware in the healthcare industry on the eve of the election, but very clearly, there's the preventative care for patients might be different than preventative care for their IT environments in some healthcare organizations, which is sad to see. But again, the more that we can do to simplify, make sure we have kind of proper controls in place, have a lot more discipline and rigor on this, and sometimes make just better choices, right? You can maybe buy a Volvo, I guess, or maybe it's Tesla now is the sort of gold standard of vehicle safety, but but there are better choices you can make these days around different platforms that provide more safety than others. And so those are things maybe I do hope that we see other organizations start to do more of.
No, I think that's a great point, Doug and Gee, both of you, in terms of simplification, thinking simplification, and in terms of better choices. I'm saying this in jest, also using a little bit more secure passwords on your Twitter account than obvious ones that people can guess. So I will
That is true.
go back to Saul to ask the next question.
Actually, that segs us into a really good question that someone raised. I mean, Doug, you were mentioning Volvo as sort of the secure place, the secure car. Question came in about, do you see that there might be an emerging standard or branding or something like that? Think food safety labels for websites and for businesses to use. I mean, HTTPS is one thing on a website, but are we to see something more that will be a better demonstration of security or safety?
In the age of IoT, I actually certainly hope so. We saw in age of electricity, right? Things like Underwriter Laboratories and CE and all manner of certifications and standards around, again, product safety that I think really ought to, in this day and age, extend to internet security around internet-enabled devices, particularly. I actually have a friend, Peter Zatko, used to be a hacker named, went by Mudge, but he's part of a group called The Loft, but he ended up over on the other side in the DoD as as a program director at DARPA. And he spun out this organization called CITL, and I wish I remember the name of what that stands for. But anyway, with his wife, they built this organization that is looking to build more standards around internet-enabled devices and software, and they have measurable outcomes, right, for what that represents. We'll see. I think it'll be some time, and again, without, as Bruce Schneider says, the sort of teeth of regulations and laws that will actually help enforce this. There's no sort of market driver necessarily, right? People continue to buy things that they don't know if they're safe or not. It's more like a lemon market. I buy a used car and I have no idea if it's going to work or not, and no one has to tell me, right? But one day, I think that we'll probably see more standards emerge in that area, simply because they have to, especially as more and more of our world relies on these devices and systems. I do think that there's probably going to be a lot more for security, the same way that there's been emerging standards around privacy.
Gee, anything to?
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that this problem has been recognized for quite some time. People have struggled with this for decades, and I think, frankly, it's just a mismatch between the technology speed versus standard and regulatory speed. I'm not sure we'll ever catch up, and those two will meet. So I think, as users, educating ourselves around just the basics of how things work and the potential, whether it's in social networks, whether it's in password usage, whether it's in IoT, the 80-20 rule applies. And if there's just basic education around these topics, I think it'll go probably further than the standards and regulations can catch up with.
Oh, that's terrific and very well said. So, you mentioned Bruce Schneider, Doug, as you were talking, and other, interesting, thought leaders in this space. So one question I have that's related to cybersecurity is that, we'd love to hear from you is, from your vantage point, what is a defining moment in the history of cybersecurity for each one of you? So what would be a defining moment that stands out for you in the cybersecurity space as we think about it? Since you mentioned Bruce Schneider, I thought I'd ask that question.
Well, I guess I'll go. For me, it was August 2016 at DEF CON. DEF CON is a kind of hacker conference where people get together, and one of the kind of favorite activities of DEF CON is for teams to get together and do an exercise called Capture the Flag, where they try to attack others while being defended, and the winner, you know, it's a big thing in that community. And in 2016, for the first time, there was a team called Mayhem, which was a completely autonomous bot that entered the contest, and it lost horribly. But we remember those days when chess champions would beat the machines, and then, you know, in Go or in chess or whatever, and eventually the machines took over. And so for me, that was like a pivotal event. That it could even get to that point means that the future is going to be very different and probably faster than we expect.
Definitely thinking in terms of machine speeds, and that's
Yeah,
where
exactly.
simplification that you talked about and appropriate automation is helpful. But Doug, go ahead.
Yeah. So in relation to Gee's sort of Skynet feature or outcome, maybe mine's a little more mundane, but maybe earlier for me was in 2009 or 2010, really when we started Duo. It was with the disclosure of a single attack called single campaign called Operation Aurora, which was the Chinese intrusions into Google, who actually first disclosed it, but also Adobe, Juniper, Rackspace, Yahoo, Symantec, Morgan Stanley, Dow Chemical here in Michigan. And at the time, it was my best man from Michigan, Dr. Niels Provost, who ended up running security at Google since 2005, who had to help respond to that. But it was the first time I think that in that transition that, you know, Saul talked about, from hobbyists to vandals to cyber criminals, then the leap to information warfare, where it became very real for everybody. And I think, you know, everyone had always just, you know, you hear all the stories of the spy versus spy, crypto AG, and, you know, backdoor devices, all these things in the much earlier era. But to see these kinds of breaches at this scale, with the kind of impact that would have, right? Where all of our information, you know, so many of us have information. Well, I guess none of us don't, right? With Google, right, or a lot of the other businesses, that there was there was really a line crossed, right? Of again how those attackers and those APTs or threat actors were coming over into sort of civilian life. And so that's when I think there really was sort of this broader focus and sort of unmasking of the much broader economy and sort of ecosystem underneath this all. And that's when we started to see the massive rise of the cyber industrial complex, right? Like there was a military industrial complex before that. It's more like a military, the digital complex, I think. And actually, I have an advanced copy of a book a friend wrote. She's a New York Times reporter, but it's actually about sort of the story of the exploit markets that developed, where again there were always black hats, but people didn't realize that there were always these black budgets, right? Where in that time that, you know, the government started stockpiling these kind of digital weapons as well. And anyway, so that was one of the first times where that was sort of disclosed, and then later things like Stuxnet and all these things. Now we all know that, you know, it's not whether it's a good team or a bad team, it's a red team or a blue team. In a lot of this stuff, and it's happening at a much different level and scale than I think everyone realized. So that was, I think, a defining sort of moment, because it opened up kind of everyone's eyes to what was happening at a geopolitical level.
No, I mean, for me, as you mentioned, Stuxnet, that's the one that stands out in my mind every time I think about, whoa, and I had to pause and think about it. And I still think about that every single time. You know, continuing our conversation, I did wanted to ask you, obviously something very important is happening this Tuesday. In fact, it's been going on for a while, the elections. And there are people have had concerns about election infrastructures. So from your vantage point, how has the state of cybersecurity and the threats we face evolved since our last presidential election, as you think about election infrastructure and more? Because, you know, people are genuinely concerned about it. So any thoughts, any wisdom from your vantage points?
Well, I would first of all recommend that the audience goes to a website, Talos Intelligence. We have a research group called Talos, and they've published a lot of material on election security. So if you are anybody interested in that, go to the website. There's lots and lots of material. And you think about the basics of passwords, and then you realize like some passwords are still pretty easy, and you can get into Twitter accounts and whatnot. There is the direct threat around these systems, and I think they are increasingly that is recognized, and so the defenses are put forward, and there may always be an issue with that. But I think this election, as much as 2016, it's the disinformation, it's the actual surround of it, not just the system, whether the system is protected and whether votes could be changed or not, but how the election is interpreted, how things are perceived. That's a much broader category, which I think we still have a lot of concern around the ability for those bad actors, if you will, to influence things without even going into the votes themselves and changing it.
Yeah, and I think it also has, seemingly becomes or weaponized in a way that it really is it ties back to military practice, right? Like psyops and these kind of things. So, when you see these ridiculous internet rumors and conspiracy theories around like QAnon, all these kind of things. So it's amazing to think that that there are groups that are actually driving those things as a matter of sort of a military objective, right? That in the level of these kind of disinformation campaigns are more than just sort of bad politics, but yeah, I think in addition to all that, it is interesting to see that we're still not in the clear, even after decades of even before Dr. J. Alex Halderman, who's really quite an authority on this here at University of Michigan, but before him, Avi Rubin, Dr. Avi Rubin, back in the day, here at U of M, hacking Diebold machines, right, and all that stuff. That we're still not in the clear, and that organizations like Voting Works, there's a group called Voting Works that some ex-Google folks building open source and safe voting systems as a nonprofit business to help folks get onto better technological infrastructure. And you can see what that looks like today. If you go to like there's a group called Verified Voting, which has a huge database of all the voting equipment and technology being used in every precinct actually in the U.S. You can see just how far behind we really are, in getting a lot of that basic infrastructure in place. Which is why I think in this cycle it's so important that we also look beyond that to all the groups that are trying to make sure that the legal infrastructure, making sure that we can protect the sanctity and integrity of our elections is there. Again, where sometimes technologists fail, the lawyers have to save us. And so this we know this from internet security, but this might happen yet with election security too.
No, I appreciate that. That's very thoughtful. Saul, I want to go to you to see if you have a few more audience questions you want to get in.
We have about 10 minutes left, and maybe we'll ask this sort of meta question now, because I think it could go on for a little bit, and there may be some questions that flow from it. And that's really, what is your vision of the threat and security landscape of the future? Pick a time frame, 10 years, 20 years. Hard to say. That's hard, so I won't go to 50, which is in the question. But what do we have to look forward to? So Doug, you mentioned a couple of things that it's interesting from my CISO perspective that we suddenly are caring about, whether that's fake news, deep fakes. Those are becoming IT security issues now. Things we never would have thought about when all we thought about was firewalls and encryption and good access controls. So what does the future have to bring?
Well, I'll throw my hat in first, I guess. Security is never in isolation. It's always connected to something else. And so when we ask about what the security of the future looks like, it's always in the context of what that future is that we're protecting. And I think two broad categories that come to mind which will be relevant and difficult for us going forward, is one that Doug already mentioned around IoT and this merging of the digital world with the physical world, and someone taking over your car and being able to do things with it or whatnot. Really making sure that we have that well protected as we think about autonomous vehicles and we think about these other emerging technologies that are futuristic. And I think the second broad category is healthcare. We see this revolution in healthcare, and I think it's accelerated with the pandemic around just more and more digital healthcare, more and more of these things mixing our information with kind of classic IT, and then having to protect that, or if it's altered. I think if you went out like very far in the future, you could extend that all the way out to like CRISPR technology, or like, can you influence hack into the human race, if you would. But I always think about it in the context of these future technologies, not in isolation necessarily.
Yeah, and I think it's a world. The wonderful thing with the internet is it's connected everybody. The really dangerous thing about the internet is it's connected everybody, including the bad people too, right? And that brings all manner of new risks and threats to every part of our lives that now has a new reliance, right, in some way on digital technology. I think if I think about sort of the way I see security trending, it is toward those kind of higher order sort of goals and outcomes that we're trying to achieve. What used to be mostly focused on trust and privacy in terms of technology and maybe policy has become more of a crisis, as a friend of ours, Alex Stamos, former CISO of Facebook and previously of Yahoo, great Duo customer and a great friend of Duo, but he actually teaching classes at Stanford on trust and safety. That underlying kind of the foundations of our lives, more than sort of security and privacy, it's sort of the fundamentals of trust and safety and all that we do, because we're creating this very sort of dangerous situation where like even our computers have computers, right? My friend Haroon Mir has some presentation on this where he counts the number of computers where you can actually run Linux, right? And it's not just your general purpose computer, it's like even your graphics card, right? The network card in your printer can run malware, and on a full Linux stack, it's really hard to keep up with. And so, we have to be more thoughtful about the intersection of all these things, that, security and all this is no longer just sort of a technological practice. It is highly integrated in a holistic way with all these other fields of study and endeavor that we have to bring together, which is where I think, Michigan, as a call out, a shout out for Michigan, the Michigan difference, the not only focus on broad global sort of impact, but the interdisciplinary way in which we achieve that, right? That's one thing that I have always appreciated about Michigan's approach, but in security, it's going to be completely crucial that we figure it out. To all these different perspectives will have to come together to make sure we achieve the outcomes we want as a society. So that society we're choosing, sort of the technology we want, not the technology creating the society we don't. So.
That's very thoughtful. We appreciate that. And thank you for the shout out from Michigan. I'm incredibly proud of this institution and what it does each day, our faculty, colleagues, staff, and our amazing students. So one final question I wanted to ask you is, obviously, we are not living in normal times right now. The pandemic has not ended, in spite of what you may have heard, and we are concerned about our well-being, our families' well-being. Cybersecurity professionals, in addition, because everybody's working remotely and so on, under a lot of stress to try to manage this completely expanded network, so to speak, that they're managing now coming from different people's homes. And so there's a lot of stress going around. So I'm curious to know what each one of you is doing for your health and wellness in your families, and what advice do you have for people so that they take good care of themselves individually in terms of health and wellness?
Want to go first, Doug?
Sure. Yeah. So what we've been doing with the teams, actually, and Cisco has done a lot. So it's not really just us or Duo but Cisco as a company has done really remarkable things. through what's transpired, and not just through the pandemic, but through all the other challenges we collectively have faced, whether it's, a reckoning with racial justice, whether it's, all the wildfires, environmental things that have been going on. But, this has been a hard year in a lot of ways for everybody. And so there've been a bunch of things, giving people more time off, coming together just to find joy, even in the midst of all this, because, we still need to find some kind of solace in this madness. So things our team has really enjoyed doing that can be done safely digitally are like, there's a local DJ here in Ann Arbor called DJ Graffiti, and he does a wonderful sort of online kind of DJ set, right, where you can take requests and all these things and have through yourselves a little party. And we did that actually multiple times with him over the past few months, and that's been a wonderful way for the team to sort of reconnect and also find some joy, because it's really important. But I mean, truly, I don't think any of us can say that we're all doing enough. But at the same time, personally, I just feel blessed. Right? We're very fortunate and privileged to be in a place like Ann Arbor, where things, generally speaking, we don't have fires in our backyard. We don't have earthquakes, hurricanes, all these kind of things hitting us. And so mostly we just have to worry about being bored and making sure that we get some exercise. But but yeah, those are things I reflect on. Just making sure that we go out of our way to help each other, check in with different folks, and make sure that we create those opportunities for there still to be the meet the humanity that we all have, right, as social creatures, right, to find each other and share these experiences together.
Very well said, Doug. Gee, I think Doug was also essentially encouraging you to move to Ann Arbor when you talked about
Exactly.
in our backyard. But
I'll have to get a jacket.
I give you the final word. Go ahead.
I'm now tech soft in the valley.
So your thoughts, Gee, on the
no, I would. I think Doug summarized it well. We have taken days off to just spend with friends and family. We do recognize that work has become very transactional with just meetings instead of the kind of natural human interaction that you'd get in casual conversations. And so we do have various informal meetings throughout the week to just get these kind of social interactions. Doug mentioned the DJs. We had a Halloween party yesterday, but just to really try to find these avenues to reconnect and stay together as teams. For me, I firmly believe in sound body, sound mind principles. So I've taken up cycling. Can't wait to get back on the basketball court. Yeah, you have to do something to move the body.
And I appreciate that. Thank you both for taking time to join us. This has been truly an honor. And for those of you who are watching, please stay safe, follow social distancing rules, and make sure you vote. And quoting famous philosopher Doug's song, find joy in everything you're doing. So thank you all. And thank you, Doug and Gee.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Go Blue.
Go Blue. All right, Doug. Thank you.